Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, November 19th, 2015. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. A couple of quick program notes. Next Tuesday, our third-hour guest is Tony Rook. Now, you may remember the name. He's the individual who challenged the BBC licensing fee on the basis that the BBC appeared to be reporting rather inaccurately on several aspects of 9/11. Most specifically, they're announcing that Building 7 had collapsed some 26 minutes before it actually happened. He has now put together his own documentary, Incontrovertible, and he's trying to get it on out there, and we're going to be talking to him next Tuesday. Tomorrow, in our third hour, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us again with her unique perspective on the world. All right, we've got a bunch of calls already sitting here waiting patiently. We're going to take them. Andrew in New York, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, I want to talk about first of all how long today is warning about the ISIS could stage another like chemical or like biological attack, whatever they're claiming to be. So these false flags are never going to stop. And
no, it does look like they're building up to something bigger and badder, and frankly, looking at the way the corporate media is pounding terror, it reminds me very much of August 2001, where they were out there with all the terror threat and Osama bin Laden, and I was still on good terms with Free Republic, and I wrote an article over there saying this isn't news reporting. This is a sales campaign, and it feels exactly like that right now, that they're really pushing this terror meme and demonizing ISIS, at least in part to offset the revelation that the United States created ISIS, and presumably ISIS is actually working for them. But it's a hard sell. They're hardly reporting anything else at all. Even the candidates running for president are having to take a back seat to this constant propaganda about fear-mongering.
I think the next false flag will possibly be blamed at Assad, and they're going to try to justify taking out Assad in Syria.
Well, that's going to be a little bit of a hard sell because ISIS and Assad are absolute enemies, and it's going to be hard to try and spin another attack by ISIS as coming from Assad. They did do it once before. One of the justifications for going into Iraq was Saddam was supposedly aiding al-Qaeda, even though the reality was they were ideological enemies. Saddam was a secular government. There wasn't a theocracy. And at this point, we're seeing the propaganda very disconnected, very disjointed, often self-contradictory, and so it wouldn't surprise me if they were going to try it. Whether anybody's going to believe it or not, I don't know. But the sense I'm getting just talking to ordinary people around here, and we have a high per capita military presence, and they're not buying any of this either.
One last thing I wanted to make about it was the refugee, and basically in Germany they're telling them they must accept the refugees. Because what happened with Germany in 1933 through 1945, basically under the Nazis, that's what they're saying. You have to accept them no matter what.
Well, that's a heck of a reach. They're trying to equate these Syrian refugees with, they're trying to make it look like they're under persecution in their homeland, which they are. But the persecution is coming from the United States, and that's the difference here. And, they're using any excuse to try and continue this agenda of blurring the human population together into this jumbled up multicultural mess of people who don't know who they really are, don't have a strong sense of identity to make them pliant, obedient workers for the New World Order.
Ever since Russia bombed ISIS and all the other rebels backed by U.S., a lot of students are thinking about returning back home.
1 million of them already turned around and started heading back. I mean, and that's absolutely what's going on. These people, for the most part, don't want to be refugees in foreign lands. They want to live in their homes. And the way that we're going to solve the refugee crisis is get the United States to stop all these wars of conquest, and the refugee problem is going to go away. Okay?
All right, thanks, Michael.
All right, thank you very much for the call. We're going to switch over here to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Time to stock up on atropine, huh?
Yeah, refresh my memory. What is that?
Atropine sulfate. It's to counteract a nerve agent.
Oh, yes, entirely possible. Get out well, we stocked up on gas masks and everything when they were screaming about, the bird flu or the swine flu in 2009 and anthrax and all the rest of that. I'm going to stick with my nano silver, to be very, very honest. But yeah, in all seriousness, all kidding aside, it looks to me like this is the beginning of a ramping up of multiple terror attacks all over the place to try and terrorize the population of the world into going along with the U.S. agenda of war and conquest.
I believe, Mike, I know this, atropine sulfate, I think, gets injected into the heart through a needle.
Well, since you can no longer buy a needle on your own here, it's kind of pointless. We need things that are legal for us to be able to buy and own and administer to ourselves in an emergency. Go ahead.
Mike, I mean, this whole refugee, I mean, people need to realize, like, if you see how anxious we are to get them in here, and we're so anxious to get them in Europe, I mean, there's an agenda going on here.
Of course there's an agenda. Of course there's an agenda. They want to blur all the human population together in this multicultural mob that doesn't have a strong sense of cultural or regional identity, to make them into obedient workers. Have you noticed the one nation that's out there screaming everybody's got to take refugees but won't take them themselves is Israel?
Yep. Hey, Mike, you notice I love how all these miles of oil trucks that just the Americans and the British just can't seem to find, along with those miles-long ISIS convoys coming out of Syria with, I mean, it just boggles my mind. You can almost see them from space. But yet
you can see them from space. That's probably where the Russians are getting their intelligence. They have very good spy satellites. And, the United States and its allies have gone back to the game they were playing before Russia came in. They're going to tell everybody we're out there fighting against the terrorists, honest, hands on heart, but they're really waging war against Bashar al-Assad. That's still the agenda. Get Assad out, and after Syria is under puppet rule, then they're going to go after Iran.
And I got a real quick quote for Putin because, all those Tu-160 strategic bombers, he said the consequences will lie on the shoulders of those responsible, literally.
Well, that could be read a couple of different ways here, and Russia has now set up their own investigation to track the flow of money going to ISIS, and that may lead to some very embarrassing revelations for the United States, because even though they're using other countries as laundries and cutouts, the Russians are very capable. They're going to find where all this stuff is coming from.
Hey, how do you like that soda can? I don't know if it's fake or real, but you notice the name of the company, Gold? I wonder if they'll have another one called Silver.
Well, it was Schweppes. It's a Schweppes product line, but the Russian investigators are saying that's complete and utter nonsense. Even with C4 in it, that would not have been a large enough bomb to bring down the airplane. So it's just more of this propaganda coming out of, the ISIS Media Division and Site Intelligence and Rita Katz Productions Limited, or whatever it is they're calling themselves now.
Right next to the Times Square one.
Yeah, absolutely. And, but, we got to take this all seriously. Now, the FBI director was just on the news saying we have no specific intelligence of a credible threat. And remember, ISIS propaganda is not credible intelligence. So, they're trying to tamp down some of the alarm, probably to protect the holiday shopping season. But there are a lot of people putting this stuff out. They're selling the fear, selling ISIS as the bad guy, and from the intensity of it, it does look like Paris was not the end of this particular false flag operation. I'm very, very worried there's going to be a lot more. Okay?
All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks. We got to let you go. We're coming up here on our first commercial break, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, getting into the news, there are more and more inconsistencies in the official story of what went down in Paris last Friday. And we are already getting word from the friends and family of all these supposed suicide bombers and terrorists that these were not fanatical Muslims at all. Now we have this suicide bomber, and there's an interesting article over in Wake Up From Your Slumber. Why would suicide bombers blow themselves up for the sake of a false flag attack? Well, there are two possibilities. One, they didn't know it was a false flag attack, and they didn't realize the people putting them up to the suicide bomb were working for CIA or Mossad. Or, and this is based on evidence that surfaced during the London subway bombing, the 7/7 bombing, where we found out that somebody, in anticipation of the drill that was running at the same time and place in London, just like Paris last Friday, 9/11, hiring Muslim men to pretend to be terrorists and try and sneak what they were told were fake bombs onto the subway trains. This is a great way to manufacture a suicide bomber. You know, hey, we're having a security drill. We need somebody to play the bad guy. We know that you need money. You're unemployed. You got a dope habit. So we're going to give you this fake bomb. Don't shake it too hard. And all you need to do is walk into this location and let the cops arrest you, and then you will be paid. And the bomb is detonated by remote control. Because we're hearing there all this talk about the first female suicide bomber. Her brother is saying she had no interest in religion, had never read the Quran. She liked wearing cowboy hats. The reality of these individuals is completely inconsistent with the manufactured media image of fanatical Muslim extremists willing to blow themselves up and go to Allah for their 42 raisins or whatever it is they get up there. Now, the video of the final assault has been made public. And what's interesting is I don't hear anything on there that sounds like a suicide vest exploding. It sounds like there's a lot of gunshots going on and she's screaming, "Help me, help me." Does that sound like somebody who's about to push the button on an exploding vest? Okay. And so, again, it's inconsistent here. Now, France's assembly has voted to extend the state of emergency for 3 months. So this is now going to become the status quo for the people of France. Raw Story has launched an attack in their website on anybody questioning or doubting the official narrative of recent events in Paris. Those despicable truthers, those wacky conspiracy theorists, how could they ever doubt the U.S. government? Well, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, Lusitania not carrying weapons, Saddam's nuclear weapons, Assad's sarin gas. How many items do I have to list for you to understand there is good cause to doubt everything being said by the corporate media and the government right now? Now, as I mentioned with that first phone call, they're ramping up the booga booga. And former British ISIS hostage John Cantley is warning of a plan by ISIS to launch 9/11-style attacks, but even bigger and badder. ISIS has come out with videos threatening New York City, specifically Times Square. Another attack on Paris. They're threatening the White House. And according to Stephen Lenman, the next false flag event will take place in multiple cities. Because if they can have multiple events in multiple cities, there's another way for Obama to declare martial law. Now then, I'm very worried, obviously, about a week from today, Thanksgiving. Although I think a false flag on Thanksgiving would cause more damage than good. It would kill that Black Friday weekend. Could set up a cascade that would absolutely bury the retail economy. But we still have Christmas and New Year and who knows what all else here. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Anna in California. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, yeah, I've been looking over all the independent media, and there was a policeman that was killed in Montebello, California last night.
Yes.
Right at the police station, and he just so happened to be from Paris. And so I was just wondering if you knew about it.
Well, I heard about it. That one is not being spun as a terror attack so much as, backlash against police brutality.
Oh, okay. All righty. Just wanted to know if you had heard.
Okay, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go.
All right.
Okay, now then, article coming out of TASS, whose website's been having a lot of problems. I don't know if they're under attack. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is out there saying, look, ISIS was set up originally using people the U.S. had kept in jail, but released and said, here, we're going to set you free, here's money. They were the core, the beginning of ISIS. This is all manufactured. Syrian President Assad, same thing. ISIS was created under U.S. supervision in Iraq using Saudi Wahhabi money. Saudi Arabia was the laundry for the operation, just like Saudi Arabia is the proxy for the U.S. war in Yemen. Now, according to the French journalist Didier Francois, who was held prisoner by ISIS for 10 months, the people holding him didn't even have a Koran. They did nothing of religion. They didn't have a Koran. It's all being manufactured. They're mercenaries playing at roles of being terrorists to get the war going. Now, Great Britain has sent a warship to back the French aircraft carrier. Meanwhile, while everybody's posturing over there in the Mediterranean, Russian aircraft have destroyed 206 terrorist facilities in Syria just yesterday. They're sending in the backfires, and now they're bringing the Bears out of retirement. These are long-range, heavy payload bombers that they're going to be using here. Now, Sergei Lavrov is out there saying there's never going to be any peace in Syria without Assad left in place. Iran is saying exactly the same thing. We got to stop mucking about with changing other countries' governments if we're going to have peace. Meanwhile, Obama is out there talking tough, saying that Russia and Iran must choose between backing Assad and saving the Syrian state. Now, Obama is still trying to act like he's in control of the situation in Syria. And as a side note, it's not up to Obama to decide whether or not a foreign government is legitimate. Given the U.S. government's violation of the Constitution, I question the legitimacy of Obama's government. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha America, welcome back to the show here. So, apparently the United States, in the war against terror, has now delivered 19,000 bombs to the Saudis who are supporting ISIS. It almost seems like they're not even trying to hide what they're doing from those of us who understand what's going on. They're just hoping to keep on fooling the American public that is still enslaved in that Matrix TV system. All right, we're going to grab ourselves some phone calls here. Tim in Wyoming, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, sir. Thanks for taking my call. You were mentioning how our beloved dictator in the White House is, sorry, not beloved, the dictator in the White House.
I was going to call you on that one.
Yeah, the beloved part, right? I know nobody really.
Yeah, I'm kind of ambivalent about him these days.
Right. Well, who has a positive opinion of that person? But anyway, getting to the subject, the reason I'm commenting on this is his actions ever since his first election have been in complete opposition to the Constitution. When he says he has a telephone and a pen, and he can do whatever he likes. I mean, there was a statement that Saddam Hussein made. I mean, Saddam Hussein was put up as such an evil man, except we started him off on his track and then decided to derail him. But
true enough.
He said, sorry?
I said true enough.
Oh, yeah. He said the law consists of 2 lines above my signature. And that's basically what an executive order is. I mean, an executive order, for all intents and purposes, is against the Constitution. I don't think that there's any part of the Constitution that says that a president can act as a dictator or in a dictatorial manner. And
no, it can't. Technically, an executive order is only binding on the institutions of the government itself. It's the means by which the executive branch is supposed to execute the will of the Congress. Unfortunately, presidents have been abusing executive orders, and it's not just confined to Obama. It goes back to Bush and Clinton. In fact, there used to be this phrase running around the Clinton White House, stroke of the pen, law of the land. Pretty cool, huh?
Right. That was, that's basically, but I mean, I think executive orders came about in, wasn't it in 1930s or 40s? I don't remember who was the first person to have done it, but ever since that point, there have been so many things that they just added by fiat, just by as I said, dictatorial hubris and essentially.
Yeah, but you are absolutely right. An executive order is not, legally binding on we the people. It's not supposed to overturn or overrule or rewrite laws as passed by Congress. Again, Congress creates the laws. The Supreme Court says they comply with the Constitution. The President's job is to obey the orders of the Congress and the American people, not to issue them. And,
right.
Of course, our federal government is so far off the constitutional reservation, and they're trying to find some way where they can basically drop what's left of it into the shredder.
Right. Like you're saying, drop it into the shredder. I mean, that's happened at colleges where people walk in with just basically, subjecting themselves to flop sweat because of the having seen a constitution or heard the word constitutionality. But getting to the point of the shredding of the Constitution, the word that most people don't mention. I mean, I think I've heard you mention, I've heard other people mention it, but it isn't as common as it needs to be. The word treason. When people don't realize what treason is, I mean, it's treason. It's not just treason against the Constitution. I mean, it's treason against the trust of the people also.
Well, let's get back here to the official definition of treason. The legal definition is giving aid and comfort to the enemy in time of war, which both Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Obama have been doing by supplying weapons and arms and supplies to ISIS and Al-Qaeda at the same time we're being told there are enemies in the war on terror.
Right. But, I mean, there's the aid and comfort part also is if you're giving them not necessarily material support, but you're using the propaganda engine of the U.S. government, the federal, we say it true and you have to believe it, engine, if you will, to tell us that ISIS, which we call it now, which was originally, I think, the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant, ISIL.
Well, they keep rebranding all the time here. I'm just going to go on calling them ISIS. Or maybe I'll start calling them Daesh or whatever they're called. It's all a hoax anyway. Anyway, listen, I hate to cut you off short here, but we got a bunch of callers and I want to try and get to them. So thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over here to Justin in Arizona. Aloha, Justin, what's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Good to hear from you. I was just calling because I'm young. I was younger back thinking about it when I was in junior high. I remember seeing them post the OJ trial on the TV in my junior high, and everyone wanting to know what was happening. And this wasn't just in my classroom; it was in all the classrooms in the school. And looking back on it now, I just think, why did I need to know that information at that age? And
that was a good question. That was definitely a good question. I mean, when I was in school, yes, they would take us out of classes so we could watch Alan Shepard's launch. They sent us home from school on the day John F. Kennedy got assassinated. I understand that. But, yeah, stopping the process of education to watch a celebrity show trial going on here, that really was kind of extreme. Anyway, listen, Justin, I would have changed schools in your position. I'm going to let you go here, and we're going to try and fit Mo in Florida in before the commercial break. Aloha, Mo. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Thanks for taking my call. I'll be quick here. I got this gut feeling that the House of Saud is going to fall. With the, they prop up Egypt, and we know what's happening with their economy now with the terrorist, with what's going on with Russia and this and that, whatever, and with the drop in oil prices. So I just feel this thing coming, and some of these, like you call them, money junkies, are going to take advantage of this because the oil prices will spike. But it doesn't take a lot to take out those Saudi Arabian oil fields, and that's I just see it happening. I just wanted your thoughts. Thanks.
Well, there's already talk that the new king of Saudi Arabia is going to be deposed because he's just not really plugged into the real world. Saudi Arabia has suffered under the oil price war that was designed to cause damage to Russia. Saudi Arabia does not like the United States for the damage it was caused. They're starting to cozy up to Russia. But Saudi Arabia, for all the money they had, they made some very bad investments, like those island cities shaped like the map of the world and the rest of it. Those are definitely not penciling out. And so, yeah, as the economy tightens up and people don't have cash for luxury items and so forth, Saudi Arabia's economy could collapse, and it could take the government with it. The same thing here in the United States. All of these economies are so tightly interlinked. When one goes down, it's going to drag the rest of them with it. And that's going to reveal to the world how ludicrous this whole idea of a single world economy and a single world government really was right from the start. Okay?
Yep, I agree. I give him 6 months. Thanks, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now, Human Rights Watch has come out with a statement that ultimately it is the United States that is responsible for the civilian deaths in Yemen, because the United States is providing the weapons to Saudi Arabia, which are being used on facilities like hospitals and other civilian structures. No big surprise there, but it's nice to see some official organizations coming on out and saying that. The University of Liverpool students have voted to support the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement against Israel. So I guess ISIS is going to have to hit that University of Liverpool here any day now. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, Vladimir Putin has just said flat out, you want to stop ISIS? Stop giving them money. And according to the Russian investigation into what's going on, 40 different countries, many of them G20 members, are openly financing ISIS as a tool to reshape the Middle East into something more useful to their interests. And we know this is real. Remember, Judicial Watch obtained a declassified U.S. government document that laid out the agenda of supporting and creating extremist jihadist groups as a tool to destabilize and overthrow nations and open them up to puppet rule. That's what happened. France is now out there saying Assad must go. Why? Assad's the enemy of the people that you keep saying carried out that terror attack. Assad is saying non. Followed it up with something which I can't say on the radio, or they take away our broadcasting license. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. Les, over there in Michigan. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I wanted to call and let you know that I think you misspoke. Saudi Arabia didn't invest in those islands. It was Dubai.
You are correct. You are correct. But Saudi Arabia did make a lot of bad investments, and they're not getting the rates of return. They built a lot of beautiful architecture, and the buildings are kind of sitting there empty. And
Dubai spent a lot of money.
Say again?
Dubai did spend a lot of money, and they're kind of hurting right now.
Yeah, they all are. It was all bubbling up and booming up. And, all of these countries they understood the oil was finite. And certainly Saudi Arabia's goal under the previous king was to try and transition themselves to being a global financial center. But of course, that is a threat to the financial centers in other parts of the world, such as Wall Street and the London's financial center there. And they don't like competition. They absolutely do not like competition.
Okay, well, have a good day there.
All right, thanks an awful lot for that clarification. We're going to let you go here. All righty, now then, the subject of Jonathan Pollard. He is about ready to step out of jail, and already their controversy is flying. Netanyahu has ordered Israeli officials to keep a low profile and not say anything that's going to inflame the situation, because there are a lot of people in the United States of America who do not think Pollard should be allowed out. I am one of them. The scale of his betrayal of his country is incalculable. And for those who don't remember, my parents' generation was forced to fork over $5 trillion, and back then $1 trillion was a lot of money, to build America's nuclear deterrent, to maintain the balance of power between the Soviet Union and the United States. Among other things, Pollard stole secrets relating to the targeting of the U.S. missiles, where they were aimed at. This is back in the day where you couldn't just retarget a missile with a computer keyboard. You had to go out to the rocket, take a panel off the side, reach in with some tools and crank some things around to set a new location. And Pollard sold that information to Israel, our supposed friend in the Mideast, who turned around immediately and traded them to the Soviet Union in exchange for increased emigration quotas of Russian Jews. Some friend. Had the United States and Russia gone to nuclear war at that particular moment, the United States would have lost. That's the scale of his betrayal. So Israel has been lobbying for Pollard's release. They see him as a hero. They don't think he did anything wrong. Israel's attitude all along has been, you should have given us that information anyway. No, look what Israel did with the information. Those who withheld that information from Israel were right and prudent to do so. Now, the story is rapidly evolving over at JTA.org. They're talking about the conditions of Pollard's parole, which is going to go on for 5 years. Pollard has to stay near his area of residence. He may not leave without permission from the United States Justice Department, from his probation officer, which I assume will be forthcoming the instant Pollard says, I'm heading to Israel. And Netanyahu is apparently already lobbying the White House to allow Pollard to go to Israel, where he will be greeted as a hero, given a permanent government pension, free medical care, all paid for by the U.S. taxpayers he betrayed. And Pollard has poured more salt in the wound by saying that he's ready to renounce his U.S. citizenship if he's allowed to go to Israel. He wants to be an Israeli. Was more loyal to Israel than his own country all along. That's what led to the betrayal. Oh, Israel has to have this. I must serve Israel, not the country I was living in and born in. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a couple of phone calls. We're going to go to Anthony in Canada. Aloha, Anthony. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. The first thing I wanted to talk about, you're talking about the possibility of Canada having a terrorist attack because of their pullout. There definitely could be a terrorist attack here in Canada. There's no doubt about it. But militarily, Canada is not really a big power. They're not really that significant. So from that perspective, I don't know if I think their decision to pull out of the whole ISIS war is really going to make...
Well, they're not on the top of the list. They're not on the top of the list. I would say top of the list right now is going to be Spain for issuing the arrest warrants for Netanyahu and his other officials. Sweden, because that one politician made a statement equating what happened in Paris with the suffering of the Palestinian people. And again, remember last year, Netanyahu warned France, if you recognize the state of Palestine, bad things will happen to you. France recognized the state of Palestine. They had the Charlie Hebdo attack. Now they've had the Friday the 13th attack. Bad things happen to countries who don't do what Israel wants them to do. But ultimately, the big problem for the war agenda is the American people are not on board. We're a war-weary nation. We've had all of our money taken, way too many of our children taken. And so I do think they're planning to do something here inside the United States of America, possible multiple locations. It's going to have to be so big and so horrific that the shock value will cause people's brains to shut down, just like the original 9/11 did. And I'm very, very worried, especially as they keep on pounding terror, terror, ISIS, ISIS, terror, terror on all the corporate media. It feels like they're building up to something. And the more everybody out here is talking about false flag, the greater the possibility that at the last second they'll pull the plug on it and say, we can't get away with this. Nobody will believe us.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned 9/11. You know how they had the whole issue with the Pakistanis, celebrating the Paris attacks. You remember Fox News did the exact same thing after 9/11. They had the Palestinians, celebrating the 9/11 attacks, and they weren't even celebrating that. They were celebrating some party that was going on. And
they were being handed free food. And the media uses this stuff all the time. They'll go back and find any video, any picture that can be used to support the propaganda, apparently unaware that in the age of the Internet, we can find the original source images and video and identify where it came from virtually instantaneously. And yes, we do outnumber them. There's, several thousand people working in corporate media, less every day, versus millions of us on the Internet doing our own homework. Okay?
Exactly. And another point regarding, a lot of people are demonizing Islam and so forth. And there's no question there's extreme groups in Islam with extreme ideologies. But the people, really have to go back to the PNAC. And that's where all of this stuff really originates from. If it wasn't for, the Israel factor, the Saudi Arabia factor, and American foreign policy, the bottom line is we wouldn't have to be worrying about Islamic extremism right now. So I think people are getting away from the root of the problem, and they're focusing on all these Islamic groups.
Well, that's what the propaganda is. That's what the propaganda is telling them to do. But every religion has its fanatics and extremists. We're certainly seeing that in Israel, in the West Bank, and Gaza right now. I was just talking yesterday where somebody sent me all this literature from a very extreme Christian point of view. They called it aggressive Christianity to build a Christian theocracy in this country. Every religion has got their Fruit Loops, their nutcases, okay? But it doesn't represent the vast majority of people out there. But the U.S. government, working with PNAC or whatever, will go into countries and try and find the religious extremists because they're useful idiots for the purposes of foreign policy, okay?
Exactly. And just one last point. I know you're talking about the possibility of the Paris attacks being a false flag.
Yeah.
My issue is this. I'm not sure whether it is a false flag. The problem sometimes is if you call something a false flag and it isn't, that one mistake, people start focusing on.
In this case, we have not made a mistake, and we have to take a break here for our top of the hour news and commercials. Absolutely beyond doubt, Paris was a false flag. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. And before I take this next call, apparently the House just passed a bill to pause the Syrian refugee program. Obama has already said he's going to veto any such laws. He loves those Syrian refugees. Do you know some of these Syrian refugees are being sent to cities that have already declared a state of emergency over their own homeless population of legal American citizens? But we got to make room for the Syrian refugees. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. John in Barbados, thank you for waiting so patiently. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Yeah. Looking at the Syria situation, since this start of the Russian real heavy bombing, looks like ISIS is being routed in the north and east of Syria. They're making their way from all over that area through Raqqa and then on down to Deir az-Zur. And they're trying to make convoys down into Iraq. Excuse me.
Yes.
So it's looking pretty desperate for ISIS. I think by the time America can get its ground troops ready, Russia will have finished the job and they won't be needed.
That's exactly that's the real reason Russia has cranked it up. If they get ISIS out of Syria, there is no reason for the U.S. or France or anybody else to come on in. Problem is solved. Except, of course, the real U.S. agenda in Syria has always been and still is get rid of Assad, replace him with a compliant puppet ruler in order to complete the stage to start the war with Iran.
Well, I think Hillary's made a statement about that, Michael. She said we should support Assad. But, I'm sure she'll get some heat for that. But she's getting enough heat already. I've got if you like, a politically incorrect message for Mrs. Clinton.
Oh, please do.
If you can't stand the heat, stay in the kitchen.
And Hillary's reply is, we have a kitchen?
I don't think she does any cooking herself.
I don't think so either. All right, anything else, John?
Yeah, well, the last thing is this Paris nonsense. It's so falling apart. The actors were all, if you like, EU citizens from Paris from France and Belgium. And it looks like they had training from Mossad, would you believe?
Oh, well, I'm not surprised at that at all. We know that Israel has been supporting, the other side all along with supplies, munitions, treatment of their wounded, training as well. Same thing from the U.S. Israel and the U.S. have been working this little ISIS scam together.
It looks like it's, but even that side of it is falling apart now, and ISIS is supposed to have hit France, and off they go and bomb Syria, and it wasn't ISIS at all.
Well, again, we're getting all these reports from people who have been with the so-called fanatical jihadists, and these people do anything religious. Now we're finding out one of the supposed suicide bombers like to drink alcohol. They don't have a Quran. I mean, it is. It's just a gigantic, gigantic hoax.
Unbelievable. Well, I don't believe it anyway.
Well, you shouldn't. You shouldn't believe anything. Beliefs are a tool to control your mind. The world would be much better off if humans lost their capacity to believe in things without knowing for certain that they're real. We'd be a lot better off. Okay? Anyway, I'm going to let you go here. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to switch over here to Damien in New York. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. How you doing? Nice to talk to you.
Thank you.
So did you see the video about, did you see the video of the surveillance camera of the attack where they were coming through, people were running into the cafe and that? Did you see that?
I've seen several videos. I'm not sure if I'm thinking of the same one that you're thinking about, but what's your observation?
Okay, so here's my question and my observation here. These people, they're basically shooting up the cafe, okay? And there's people that were sitting outside, people that were inside, people that were behind the counter. Everybody is ducking behind counters and so forth and so on. There's some people that run inside, duck behind things. There's people outside that are basically, they dive to the ground and they just stay there and they stay motionless. And you see the person run by and then they come back and they basically stop short of entering the cafe. And there's people right on the ground, basically at his feet. 2 women, and thank God that the guy didn't just decide to open fire on them, but he didn't. And that's kind of interesting because you would think somebody that their mission is basically to kill with reckless abandon and they're a terrorist, they would just kind of just go ahead and pump a couple bullets into these people. I mean, I sound, morbid about it, but I mean, if these people are these terrorists that they're claiming that they are, and with no regard for human life and all this, everything else, it's interesting that he didn't do that. He didn't go inside the cafe. It's visible. The people were visible from outside the cafe that they were ducking, behind tables and so forth and so on. And he didn't bother to go in or do anything like that. So that was a very weird. I don't know. It was very, very weird to me. It just seemed like the idea was to just scare and. If you catch anybody with some fire, great, but otherwise, let's move on. Let's go to the next part. Let's try to shoot up this area or whatever. So,
yeah, the goal wasn't to kill the maximum number of people, but to create a newsworthy setting.
Yes. That's what, from looking at that video, that's clearly apparent. It's very clear that it's very odd. The other thing, I don't know if you knew about this or had read anything about it, but over here in New York, Cooney, one of the community schools here in New York, there were protesters, and they basically were saying they were supporting the Intifada, basically the Palestinian 2 states and having their own state. So they're saying about supporting the Intifada. Intifada, thank you very much. And they were also saying get Zionists out of Cooney, which is the school, C-U-N-Y. Mm-hmm. So they were saying Zionists out of Cooney and blah, blah, blah. All these, the Zionists were basically saying this is anti-Semitic, blah, blah, blah. And there is still this misunderstanding that Zionists and Zionism and Israel and Israelis are not one and the same. There is a different Zionism and Zionists.
Zionism is a political movement.
Yes.
Okay, just like the Republicans and the Democrats or the Communists or whatever, it is a political movement. And, this idea of constantly deflecting criticism by screaming Jew hate and anti-Semite, it's like trying to defend the Nazis by saying, oh, you just hate the German people. And when you change the context like that, it's obvious how ridiculous this all is, but Israel keeps getting away with it because they are supported by the corporate media.
Right. Zionists want a Jewish state in Palestine. That's what they want.
Yes.
And for people to say get Zionists, because there's people that are supporting Zionism inside, and the professors in particular, and that's what they're saying. And they're, of course, everybody else is saying this is anti-Semitic, and they were trying to protest and get all these petitions signed to say, against this anti-Semitism and everything.
Well, they're trying to use that anti-Semitism label to literally have free speech ended on college campuses. And, out there in the University of California system, there's a big debate. Dianne Feinstein and her husband are very much connected in with this thing. And their goal is to literally criminalize criticism of the government of Israel. And it's a complete violation of the First Amendment, which says we have a right to criticize any government anywhere at any time without fear of repercussion. And it basically lets us know Israel hates the Bill of Rights. They don't want freedom of speech or thought. They want you to believe what they tell you to believe. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, Damien. Back with another phone call after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Quick little update on that House bill. The House passed a bill that will halt the Syrian refugee program until there is some mechanism in place to guarantee that these people coming in do not pose a security threat to the United States of America. Right now, it's just a little piece of paper. Are you a terrorist? Yes, no. That seems to be it. Now, the bill passed the House 289 to 137. That's enough of a margin to override a presidential veto. May not have as much support over in the Senate. Minority Leader Harry Reid says he is going to do everything he can to block the bill. If he fails to do so, and it passes the Senate, Obama has said he will veto it. Whose side are these guys on? It's very clearly not the American people. And I am very, very angry that no matter how we vote, we keep getting politicians whose loyalty is to someplace else on the planet, whether it's Tel Aviv or who knows. We need a government that's going to put America first, second, and third. And yes, that's nationalistic, and there's nothing wrong with being nationalistic. Taking care of our country and our citizens first. That's the job of the government, not take our money and give it to the money junkies or give it to Israel or give weapons to all these other countries. That's not what the government's job is supposed to be. In his farewell address, George Washington laid it out. Avoid foreign entanglements. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Mark in Texas, thank you for waiting patiently. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about what you said about this being a false flag. I'm up in the air about this, whether this is legit or not. But the question I have is this. If this is a false flag, and let's say they used either American or Israeli agents, do you think these guys would be that crazy that they would blow themselves up if these were Westerners that did this? You know, like Israelis are American?
No, I don't think they did. I think what they went is they went and they got some patsies from the Muslim community, told them they were being hired as actors and targets for the terror drill that was going on at the exact same time and place, and they were given what they were probably told was a fake bomb, and they were told, if you can walk into this place with the bomb, come on back, we'll give you a few $100 or whatever's going on there, and then, of course, the bombs are set off by remote control. I mean, that's one way to do it.
What about the shooters? People do all the shooting.
Well, remember, the eyewitnesses said the shooters were clean-shaven white people. Okay, and so far, the identified suspects are all Europeans with EU passports. The Syrian passports that were found near the supposed suicide bombers are fake. And we're being told, let the Syrian refugees into your country, but because of the Syrian phony passports, the U.S. and France have hauled off and started war on Syria again. Obviously, it doesn't really make any sense. If this was a war on the terrorists who committed the atrocity in Paris, they'd be going after these people in Europe, and they wouldn't be in this hot rush to go back into Syria.
I wish that Putin would already tell everybody else that Assad is going to stay there, and if you want to go to war with Syria, you're going to go to war with Russia. I wish he'd make it plain to them.
He's made it very plain. He's made it very plain in the language of diplomacy. But again, Putin is trying to keep the situation from escalating, and he's not going to come out with inflammatory statements that he knows the Western media will turn back on him.
I mean, I hear them day after day. The butcher Assad, this Assad, that Assad. I call Assad the Winston Churchill of the Middle East, personally. I think he's standing there. He shows tremendous courage. The man has never been a butcher. I don't know where they get this thing. He's fighting a civil war.
The same place they got Saddam's nuclear weapons and Assad's sarin gas. They're just making it up. Remember, Assad is an elected leader, In fact, he won his last election by a huge margin that American politicians would be envious of.
Well, they say that it was a phony election. That's what
well,
they say.
I mean, if anybody's going to know about phony elections, it's going to be the U.S. government. But, I mean, look at the long history of U.S. interventions in other countries. Iran in 1953, CIA and they're now admitting they did this. We're proud. We went into 1953 in Iran and we kicked out the government those Iranian people wanted, and we gave them the government we wanted. And then they did it again in Chile in 1973. This is how the U.S. has built its empire since the end of World War II. The difference is today everybody knows that's what the U.S. government is doing. And everybody's digging in their heels.
Then you watch like Fox, what I call Fox Neocon News, and they say matter-of-factly that he gassed his own people. He didn't gas his own people. It's obvious he did. That gas probably came from the CIA, if I had to guess.
Even the United Nations inspectors said that the gas was being used by the terrorists, by the rebels, to frame Assad, and the story never made any sense anyway, because nobody could come up with a reason why Assad would gas his own Alawite supporters with a banned chemical weapon on the very day the UN chemical weapons inspectors showed up virtually in front of them. It never made any sense whatsoever.
And you know what? When they say, well, he's a butcher because so many people died in the Civil War, well, according to that same logic, then we can say that Abe Lincoln was a butcher because he had 600,000 people died, including a lot of civilians, especially with Sherman's march through Georgia.
You're absolutely right, but again, it's also a lie to call what's going on in Syria a civil war. It isn't. Most of that opposition are hired mercenaries brought in to overthrow Assad. The Free Syria Army, I think they just renamed them the Democratic Forces of Syria to make it sound attractive to Americans. 95% of them are not from Syria. And a lot of them have started quitting because they're not getting their paychecks for doing what they were hired to do.
Aren't people going to wake up and understand this?
We are. We have woken up. That's what, yes, everybody understands this is the trick the government has been playing. Any time in history, that a leader wants to launch a war of conquest, he has to lie and trick his people into it. It's not shocking. It's not a scandal. It's business as usual. It's how these things are always done.
But when you call up some of these mainstream talk shows, even a Breitbart, which is halfway decent in a lot of things, they'll basically look at you like you're crazy. They'll say basically you're crazy if you tell them this. The only one that's actually starting to lean towards this kind of thinking now is Michael Savage. I'm not including Alex Jones because Alex Jones is not really traditional talk radio. He's really more internet. Him and you and him are actually a lot alike in most things. There's a little bit of a difference between...
There's one significant difference between us, but, you're right. Alex is doing a good job over there, and he is out there, calling people's attention to the falsehood. Anyway, listen, Mark, I got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Stay tuned. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. Finishing up with Israel. Israel is going to sue the European Union over the rule requiring the labeling of products from the illegal settlements in the occupied territories. Now, mind you, the European Union hasn't ordered these labels in Israel or the occupied territories. They've mandated the labels in their own country, where they have legitimate jurisdiction. But Israel is going to try and take them to court to say that we, Israel, will tell you what you can and cannot label in your own country. Arrogance run amok here. Let's talk about the economy a little bit. The news is as usual. The Square valuation has been cut to $4.2 billion, down from its initial $6 billion, and it's raised concerns about how tech startups going for their IPOs are being grossly overvalued and cannot actually meet the performance goals promised. And that's a legitimate concern. Because when you claim to have a huge value, you'd better produce. That's one of the things that took Enron down. They were using mark-to-market accounting and claiming huge value of assets and promised future profits, and it just didn't happen, didn't materialize. Right now, $26 trillion of government bonds are trading below a yield of 1%. And according to the policymakers, this has been crucial to power the economic recovery when the government bonds have less than 1% yield. As of today, the Baltic Dry Freight Index has hit an all-time record low. It is a red warning sign that manufacturing is slowing down because orders for products are slowing down. Now, the European Union has just announced they are not going to compensate Ukraine for losing the Russian market from the first of the year because of all the embargoes and blockades and everything that was going on. And basically the reason the European Union gave is a common sense one. We have already poured so much money into Kiev, and Kiev isn't producing. We don't have any more to pour in there. Now, as you know, over in Finland, they've had a referendum that passed and is now forcing the government to have a debate on a possible exit from the euro currency, possibly from the European Union itself. So between the immigration, refugee crisis and the economic crisis, it looks like the European Union's days are numbered. It's starting to come apart. And, of course, the globalists don't want that. Their plan was they were going to form Europe into a European Union. They were going to merge Mexico and Canada and the U.S. into the North American Union. And then when they only had a few unions, they were going to merge all those into this grand, global, permanent fascist dictatorship. Now, interestingly enough, a letter on the possibility of cooperation between the European Union and the Eurasian Economic Union has been sent by the EC chief to Putin, the European Commission. President Jean-Claude Juncker is now in a dialogue with Putin about economic cooperation between the EU and the Eurasian Economic Union, of which Russia is a part. It's another indication that Europe is getting very, very tired of going along with the U.S. government's agenda and all the sanctions and all the economic harm being caused by it. Now, we have been commenting on how the mighty National Security Agency seems unable to deal with ordinary cybercrime. And you'd think they'd want to do it because they need all the positive press they can get, but apparently they're absolutely impotent on this. And so there's a warning going on out for people who are planning on doing their holiday shopping online to be very, very careful because this is the holiday season, and the malware writers know there's going to be a lot of opportunity out there. And you just need to be very, very careful. Have your security files up to date. Buyer beware. And one has to wonder, just what is the NSA doing with all this money and authority they've been given? They haven't actually found any terrorists. They're not finding any cyber criminals. What are they doing? Is it a big bluff? Is that giant data center in Utah just really an empty building? They play handball in to pass the time. They don't seem to have accomplished a whole heck of a lot. Certainly didn't know Paris was coming. Haven't been able to track down whoever it was who made those hoax bomb threat phone calls yesterday. Now then, United Health, the biggest health insurer in the country, United Health Group, is now talking about pulling out of Obamacare. This is only a month after saying, yes, we love Obamacare, we're going to be on board. And apparently they've changed their mind. They're looking at the numbers and the performance, and they're starting to scale back their marketing efforts for plans it's selling this year under the Affordable Care Act, and is saying they may quit it entirely in 2017 because the business has proven to be more costly than expected. For some reason, they don't seem to understand why, when they jacked up the health insurance prices, that people just didn't rush right on out to buy them. And, of course, with the nation's largest health insurer pulling out of the system, that's a major blow to Obama's signature domestic policy achievement. Except, of course, it wasn't an achievement. It's been a failure since day one. The website itself, hugely expensive, buggy as all get out, kept crashing. Sky-high insurance policy prices, sky-high deductibles, making those policies virtually useless to the average American. It's a disaster. It's been a failure for both its stated purpose of affordable health care for Americans and its real covert purpose of creating huge windfall profits for the health insurance companies that wrote the Affordable Care Act. And we're going to share a piece of the action of all that glorious windfall as taxes to the U.S. government. It's a complete, utter failure. Hasn't accomplished anything it was supposed to. Now then, let's talk about our presidential candidates. What happened in Paris, what is happening at the borders, has given Donald Trump a huge boost. And, of course, Ben Carson is self-destructing with all his nonsense stories out there. Reuters poll has Trump at 36%, Carson at 15%. Fox News has Trump at 27%, Rubio at 13%. Morning Consult has Trump at 38%, Carson at 19%. Huffington Post, Trump 31%, Carson 19%. In the latest Fox News New Hampshire poll, Ben Carson is fading. That's their word. He is fading fast. Now then, not too long ago, the GOP leadership extracted a promise from Donald Trump that he would support the party's nominee. And I think it's time for Donald Trump to remind the GOP they have to keep that promise as well. The people have spoken. The GOP better wake up and realize that the only way they're going to keep the White House out of Hillary Clinton's hand is to go with Donald Trump. And we need to ask the GOP leadership, are you really willing to give Hillary Clinton the White House for 8 years just to keep Donald Trump out of the clique, out of the Soch group? Because it does appear they may be willing to do that. And that's a good reason for the Republican voters to start thinking about replacing their party leadership. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, Donald Trump, you got to admire his style. Various groups, of course, it's a very common trick to plant somebody in a crowd at a political rally to try and disrupt what's going on, hurl insults, try and maybe get the crowd to go, yeah, you're this, and try and make things difficult. And they're pouring into Trump's campaign, no question about it. So Trump was having this rally in Worcester, Massachusetts. I know it well. And he's talking about his platform, what he stands for, and this heckler stands up and starts screaming, Trump's a racist. And the crowd goes wild. They wave their Trump signs in front of his face here, and they start chanting, USA, USA, while the heckler is escorted out. And Trump responds by saying, aren't my events a lot more exciting than all those other guys? Then they had another guy who stood up, criticizing Trump for Trump's criticism of Obama for intentionally expanding the food stamp program to get us all dependent on the government. And after the security took that guy out, Donald Trump said, I mentioned food stamps, and this guy who's seriously overweight goes crazy. That's an amazing sight. Trump tells it like it is. And I love the fact that he's not wasting his time with political correctness. That's probably why a lot of people hate him so much. But Trump is a big problem for Hillary Clinton. They can't Ron Paul him. And all I can say is, if anybody from the Trump campaign is listening to my show, please make sure he's wearing his Kevlar undies. Because if the Ron Paul tactic won't work, they may try and resort to the Robert Kennedy approach. And I'm serious. I don't want to go through that again. Please take care of the Donald. We don't agree on everything, but it's very obvious the Republican voters want him. The GOP leadership doesn't. The money junkies don't. Israel doesn't. We, the people, are supposed to pick our own leaders. Deal with it. Now then, we're going to take a phone call here. Joe in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. Thank you for taking my call. The previous caller made me think of a question, and I wonder if you could answer it. Is Ron Paul eligible to run for president, or has he not met the qualifications to do such.
Of course Ron Paul is eligible. He ran twice, 2008 and 2012. There's no limit on how many times you can run for president, only how many terms you can serve.
Okay, there's not like a deadline before you could enter, like you have to enter it by 2015 to run for 2016. There's nothing like that?
Yeah, there is a deadline to file the paperwork. I don't think it's passed yet because they're still talking to Mitt Romney about trying to throw his hat in the ring to derail Trump. I don't know when the deadline is, but I don't think it's expired just yet.
Okay. The other thing I was wondering about is I see that issue where Harry Reid took $1 million bribe to legalize online gaming.
Yes.
Has started to become an investigation by a Utah Attorney General.
Good.
And it looks like it's starting to come to the forefront. The stuff that's been hushed for the last few years were, what was the man's name that worked for the Obama administration before they brought in Valerie Jarrett?
The previous Attorney General, and I'm spacing on it.
Yes, and he blocked the FBI and others from investigating Reid, and now it looks like it's still going to finally move forward because the checks that were sent to the secret banks finally came forward, as well as the emails and the secret recordings are starting to come forward, and it looks like it's starting to gain some momentum.
Well, I would like to see it happen. Unfortunately, what we have seen from all of our attorney generals, going all the way back to William French Smith, for somebody who's supposed to be the top law enforcement officer in the country, they're proved to be the top criminals, protecting the top criminals. It's not a justice system, it's a just us system.
Yeah, look out for the corrupt and make sure they're protected.
Very much so. And what's kind of stunning here is the average American, at least until recently, has been about as clueless about the true nature of their ruling class as any countries we saw during the medieval period or even the Renaissance, where they're buying all the nonsense coming from the pulpit and the town crier about how great government is. And then we look back in history and see what these people were really like Caligula. And we have to understand there's an equivalent disconnect now. Most Americans are just not even emotionally prepared to understand how completely corrupt our ruling class has become. Okay?
Right. It seems like once you convince the people, like that, I don't know the person's actual name. I think he's called the Tytler or the Tytler cycle.
Yes.
Where he studies as the people methodically or methodical gradualism, they gradually become more dependent and the government gives them more and the more they can take from the public treasury, the more they vote in the person that keeps giving them more goodies.
Yeah, well, that's certainly a big part of what brought down Rome as well, but you need to understand government encourages dependency. They don't want us taking care of each other. They want to take all of our money away from us, and then they will hand it back to us in order to make us dependent on the government, which makes us more obedient. Dependency is slavery, and every government tries to make their population dependent on the government so they won't stand up and say, hey, I think you're doing a bad job.
None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free.
Well, that's the problem with beliefs. And you shouldn't allow belief to replace thinking as you evaluate the world. Joe, thank you very much.
Rationalization. Thank you.
All right, we're going to let you go here. Got an email from a listener correcting me about the Baltic Dry Index. Apparently today's close isn't the all-time record low. The all-time record low was 509 last February. It closed at 519 today. So it's close to the all-time low, but I stand corrected on that one, and thanks to the alert listener on that one. It's still a red warning flag that we are definitely continuing deeper into the recession despite all the government's assurances that we're in a recovery. Got all these politicians out there saying, oh, the economy's wonderful. You know, all my friends are working. We've all got money. Don't know what's wrong with you people. Okay, getting on back to the Clinton Foundation and their various troubles, it has now come out the Clinton Foundation is running a $20 million private equity firm down in Colombia. Officials are saying, this is very unusual. And, of course, it creates another conflict of interest. and a private equity firm. It's an investment firm, and they've got it in Colombia where it can stay hidden for the most part from the American people and government oversight. It's really absurd. There's an article that came out over in Harper's, no less, called Shaky Foundations, and saying there is absolutely no dispute. Former President Clinton was directly involved in helping foundation donors and his personal cronies get rich. I still think that we need to keep on pushing that question. If the combination of Hillary's weak email server with U.S. government secrets on it, coupled with that so-called charitable foundation that is legally allowed to accept foreign money and is still doing so, was a repeat of the 1995 Chinagate scandal, where Bill Clinton was authorizing the transfer of sensitive technology to China and Chinese money was flowing into his re-election campaign. The parallels are too obvious. This question must be asked. And the longer the government and the corporate media refuse to address this issue, the more complicit they look. They're not even addressing it to say, oh, this is complete and utter nonsense. How could you even think such a thing about Hillary? Long experience. Now, over in Great Britain, David Cameron, I guess, was feeling a little insecure. He's now going to get his own presidential jet, Camforce One. The British government is going to spend about £10 million converting a military plane for official use by Prime Minister David Cameron, who was feeling very left out because the American president has a private jet. The Russian president has a private jet, not as grand. And now David Cameron, he will have his own presidential jet. And he insists they're doing this because in the long run it will save money. And, oh yes, the royal family gets to use it as well. These things never save money. It's ego run rampant. Every corporation with a corporate jet says, oh, we're saving money with this. They never are. And they take it as a loss on their taxes, and you get to pick up the tab. Got to take a break for news and commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha America, aloha Scotland, aloha the world. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. And we're going to talk a little bit about the immigration crisis. Now, over in Europe, this is causing huge amounts of trouble, not the least of which because the open borders allow anybody to come on in, including people intent on doing bad things. And there's a very interesting article coming out of the Daily Mail, The End of Schengen as We Know It. Now, Schengen is the name for the internal borderless policy of the European Union, where you can go from England to France without going through a passport check. And now this is starting to come to an end. Greece, Spain, and Italy are going to be kicked out of the Schengen zone, along with some other Eastern European countries, because this free travel anywhere in the European Union is being blamed for the migrant crisis. Well, that's not being entirely honest, because the blame for the migrant crisis is that, the terrorists aside, these are people driven from their homes by U.S. wars of aggression. That is who is ultimately to blame for the refugee crisis, the United States government. And it's very dishonest for the corporate media to not acknowledge that. Some are starting to. Some are saying, look, we got to face facts. These people are refugees because the U.S. wars made them refugees. Now, apparently there was a huge anti-immigration protest in Poland that the media absolutely did not want to report on because they're still part of this agenda to convince you to open your borders and let the illegal immigrants in, let the refugees in, just let them pour on in, and we're going to create this huge multicultural mass of people who don't have any clear idea of who they are, where they came from, because if they don't have a strong local, cultural, regional, historical sense of an identity, it's easier to manipulate them. Keep them dumb and working. Same principle followed during the medieval period. Just get them believing in the imaginary plane in the sky. Don't let them learn anything else. It'll just trouble their little minds. Now, even before the attacks in Paris, officials in the U.S. government were trying to warn the White House. This was a security nightmare to have this open border policy. Now we're even hearing apparently some Syrians just got arrested coming across from Mexico into Texas. It is ridiculous to scream war on terror and have the NSA spying on all the law-abiding American citizens in this country at the same time the borders are wide open to anybody who wants to walk across. They could come in with a vial of a highly contagious biological weapon or something else. Now, according to a story over in the Free Beacon, Al-Qaeda terrorists have already entered the United States through the refugee program. And they know that because 2 Al-Qaeda terrorists who had killed American soldiers were able to enter the country as refugees. This is according to a report released from the House Homeland Security Committee. And apparently these 2 guys settled in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and apparently couldn't keep their mouths shut about it, and they wound up getting arrested again. But if we've got 2 that we know of, there are probably more. And that leads us to this article coming out of AbsoluteRights.com. And I don't agree with everything that they say, but they make a point. The behavior of our corporate media and Barack Obama is that they don't really seem all that concerned about American safety. It seems to be a low priority compared to serving this New World Order globalist agenda of blending all of the populations of the world together. Now, article coming out of the Realist Report. Jewish groups demand the U.S. must take in more refugees. And apparently all of these various Jewish charities, relief organizations, even the government of Israel are out there saying, you got to have more refugees. Just pile them on in there. Pile them on in there. Blend them all together into a mass of people with no clear idea of who they are. Except, of course, for one place. Israel refuses to allow any refugees into their country. In fact, they're building another wall along the Syrian border, as if the Syrians could get across the Golan Heights, which is now militarily occupied by Israel. Maybe they're building the wall along the north edge of the Golan Heights. We probably ought to get on the satellites and look at that. But do you see the double standard here? You all have to take all these refugees and immigrants here, but we're in Israel. We have to keep our racial purity and our cultural identity, so we can't let these people in. And by the way, a lot of these refugees pouring into the United States, pouring into Europe, are emptying out vast areas of the Middle East that Israel covets as part of Eretz Israel, Greater Israel, from the Nile to the Euphrates. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, these refugees are being sent into cities like Seattle and Los Angeles, who have already declared states of emergency over their homeless population of legal American citizens. And I guess they're just going to tell the legal American citizens, too bad for you. We've got to take care of these illegals and the refugees first. Now, as you know, we have some 33 state governors are saying they do not want the refugees in their state. They don't have jobs for them. They don't have homes for them. They don't have infrastructure to support them. They don't want them. The White House is taking the position that the states do not have a legal right to refuse a federal dictate to accept the refugees. But the governor of Texas has said, in point of fact, under federal law, the states do have an option, because all this federal money that is coming into all these agencies in their state is under the control of the governor. And the governor can tell these agencies what to do, including no more of these people coming in or I'll turn off the funds. There is clearly a constitutional crisis brewing between the states wanting to take care of their legal citizens and their own economy and a federal government that is fully on board this agenda to bring about the New World Order by pouring all of the Americans and all the Syrians and all the Mexicans and all the Nicaraguans into a giant blender and hitting puree. Now, of course, as the refugee crisis raises the possibility of ISIS attacks in this country, Congress has leapt into action. And they've created a transgender task force to promote LGBT rights, because that's what's important to the Congress of the United States of America right now. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the week, everybody is trying to exploit the Paris attacks for their own agenda, and it's prompted new calls by United States senators to pass legislation that would mandate everybody use encryption to which the U.S. government has backdoors. And, of course, once you use encryption that the U.S. government has a backdoor to, so do the cyber criminals. In many cases, they overlap. Kaspersky identified the Equation hacking group as part of the NSA. And in any event, mandating that we all use some government-friendly encryption isn't going to work, because real criminals and real terrorists won't obey the law. They'll use their own systems of encryption. We proved how easy it is to do. Like all these other government solutions to problems, it will increase cost, complexity, and inconvenience for the law-abiding American citizens and have no effect whatsoever on cyber criminals and terrorists. Whose side is the government on? It doesn't seem to be on the side of the law-abiding American citizens. And remember, last year, the police, using civil forfeiture laws, stole more from the American people than the criminals did. What does that tell you? We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, we are seeing all these various government agencies, FCC, NSA, CIA, FBI, all pushing the agenda of banning websites or communications with end-to-end encryption. They want everything wide open so that they can watch your life closely, steal your business secrets, make copies of pictures of your boyfriends and girlfriends, sons and daughters in states of undress. It's a perk of the job. And again, this has no effect on real criminals and real terrorists. None of these agencies knew that Paris was going to happen. None of these agencies are able to stop this tsunami of cybercrime sweeping across the net. They are, in fact, totally impotent. And the only suggestion they've got is going to make things worse. We have a right to privacy not only from criminals and cyber criminals. We have a right to privacy from business competitors who want to steal our secrets, and we have a right to privacy in that Fourth Amendment from the government itself. Now, contrasting with all of this screaming about how if we didn't have encryption, we would have stopped Paris and everything, the reality is there's a new study showing that there hasn't actually been an increase in the use of encryption by terrorists, by jihadists, since Edward Snowden's revelations. They apparently didn't notice. And I don't think it has anything to do with the use of encryption on the Internet. It has to do with the fact that real criminals and real terrorists, state-sponsored ones, aren't using the Internet anyway. Remember, those people in Paris had military-grade weapons, logistical support. Somebody hacked into the computers of the French security services and paralyzed it 48 hours before the terror attacks happened. That's nation-state technology. And if they had military weapons, they probably had military communications. Encrypted, frequency, agile radios. They're not going to use the cell phones or the Internet. They know it's being monitored. Of course not. Now, back before the second invasion of Iraq, the U.S. Army wanted to wargame it out, and they had a military exercise where they had a whole bunch of U.S. forces plague the U.S. forces, and they tapped this general and his forces to be the bad guys, the Iraqis. And they went on out there to the American West, all over the desert there, and apparently the general who was in charge of the OPFOR didn't get the message that he was supposed to lose, because this general simply abandoned the use of all electronic communications that he knew were being monitored. Did everything with couriers, messengers, hardline telephones, lots of pre-planning, little books. If you receive a message, smoke, this is what you will do. Nothing sent over anyone. He beat the U.S. forces by simply not using the systems of communication he knew the U.S. forces were going to be intercepting. got in trouble for it, too. You're supposed to fight the war the way we tell you to fight it. How dare you go outside the box? Now, the fact of the matter is that all this mass surveillance of the law-abiding American citizen has never thwarted a large terror attack. We're told that somewhere out in the hinterland there were some people talking about terror, and we found them. And anytime anybody asks Brenner for details, oh, we can't tell you that, it will reveal methods and secrets and everything. There is absolutely no proof at all that the mass surveillance by the United States government on the law-abiding American people in violation of the Fourth Amendment has had any positive results at all. Now, compounding that is a story coming out of RINF.com. There was apparently a document leaked out of the National Security Agency which confirms an observation I made when Snowden first went public with this. They're sweeping up everything. It's a vast amount of data. And the acquisition of data is linearly additive, but correlating that data is an unlimited expansion, to use the mathematical terms of it. And I said they're going to be drowning in the data. They're not going to be evaluating it. Yes, they want to find the needle in a haystack. You don't dump more hay. And that's exactly what they've done. And this NSA document is basically saying anytime they find anything useful, it's more a matter of sheer luck, stumbling across it. Now, this article apparently actually came out in March of 2011 and was kept under wraps. They can't make heads or tails of this deluge of data they've been collecting. Now then, over on the financial center side, they're now trying to put out this idea that ISIS is funding all of their terror operations using Bitcoin, and therefore we have to shut Bitcoin and all cryptocurrencies down. All money has to go through our banks who are on our side and think only of our welfare. Like I said, everybody is trying to use Paris and ISIS for their own agenda. The private central banks do not want there to be any alternative to their currency loaned into circulation at interest, because that is how they enslave the population of the planet. Now, not too long ago, there was a big stink where it came out that the Tor anonymizing network was compromised by a project run by Carnegie Mellon University, and the allegation came out that the FBI had actually paid them to do it, to compromise the Tor anonymous system, and which supposedly was $1 million payment. Now, the FBI and Carnegie Mellon are saying that the $1 million payment claim is inaccurate. Now, in political circles, this is known as a non-denial denial. They're not denying that Carnegie Mellon was paid to break the security and anonymity of Tor. They're just disputing the payment itself and hoping you'll leap to the conclusion that the government would never, ever do anything as underhanded as try and compromise the anonymity of the American people. Now, Dr. Catherine Albrecht is out there saying that police are now tracking cross-country truck drivers using their shopper reward cards. You know, when you go to the market and you buy something, you swipe that card, the government gets a record of what you are buying to make sure you're not buying too much of the wrong things. You should swap your card with somebody else every once in a while, just to mess the system up here. But apparently, the government is able to track truck drivers just with those shopper reward cards. We know where you went and when you were there and how you got there. Really? Find anything useful in there? Apparently not. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, there's a company called Rights Corp, and they are one of these companies that search the Internet for anybody violating a copyright, and then they bring an action against them and try and collect a fine. And they claim a very noble purpose in protecting intellectual property rights, but basically they're just out there trying to make money, and apparently they haven't been doing it very good. Apparently so far this year they have lost $3.1 million, because for every $1 they succeed in extracting in a fine, they're spending 4. That's a failed business model, to say the least. Now, down in Texas, there's been a big stink because parents, in looking at the textbooks being given their children at school, especially since the advent of Common Core, they're finding lots of mistakes. A lot of inaccuracies, a lot of real problems. And they were saying the textbooks need to be fact-checked. We need to have real experts on these topics, like the Bill of Rights, go through and point out where these textbooks are inaccurate. We know the Common Core version of the Second Amendment says you have the right to keep and bear arms if you're in a government militia, which is not what the Second Amendment actually says. The Texas Board of Education just voted down having their textbooks fact-checked. We don't need accurate textbooks. We just need to tell the kids what they have to believe. That's our job here. Now, turning to the realm of human-caused global warming, the French government is using the Paris terror attacks as an excuse to basically lock down the coming Paris climate talks. They're basically canceling all public demonstrations. Nobody's going to be allowed to be out front, saying it's all a crock. And they're saying that the climate summit will basically be the core negotiators talking about the issues. In other words, implementing the already desired agenda. No dissent, no questioning, no opposing points of view will be allowed, because the terrorists will win. So, now then, we've been talking about this scandal with the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, in which earlier this year they came out with this report saying that contrary to all the evidence and the data that has been collected over the last several years, there has been no pause in human-caused global warming. It has continued in an unbroken chain. The sky is about to fall. You are all sinners, and you will atone by paying carbon taxes. And this prompted an inquiry from the Congress, who requested the raw data, the methodology, and internal communications related to this report. Because the report flies in the face over the several record-setting winters we've had since the year 2000, when we were all told snowfalls were a thing of the past. And NOAA is stonewalling. They're taking the position that confidentiality is essential to preserve the integrity of the scientific process, which makes absolutely no sense at all. The integrity of the scientific process is preserved by complete transparency and reproducibility. Now, apparently, some whistleblowers inside the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration have come forward to say that a lot of NOAA's own scientists didn't agree with this report, and that it was literally rushed out the door to support Obama's agenda of imposing a carbon tax on you. How many times do you have to be lied to before you understand you live underneath the government that lies to you about everything? Meanwhile, back in the real world, Scotland could be hit with 8 inches of snow. Temperatures are falling lower than in Moscow. Boston is bracing for what they expect will be another record-setting snow this year. See, up in Juneau, a lot of snow there. 10 inches of snowfall there. Eastern North Carolina is saying they got too much snow even for people who love the snow. It was way, way too much. And, of course, there's a massive snowstorm out in Washington State. And they're saying it may even get down to the lower levels next week, places where it normally doesn't snow in Washington State. Now, we have seen this phenomenon where they're talking about global warming, global warming, global warming, and they'll have an occasional hot day where they'll take the temperature out at the airport surrounded by jets burning tons of kerosene and say, oh, look how hot it is out here. Proof of global warming. But looking at overall summer temperatures. And NOAA's still out there insisting 2015 is the hottest year on record. And they're actually kind of wrong. And if you look at the actual records objectively, honestly, without an agenda, prior to 1955, hot summer afternoons were very common in the United States. They're occurring much less frequently now. And if you look at all of the temperature stations for their all-time high record temperatures, they all happened back in the 1930s. 2015 is not the hottest year on record. 1930s exceed that, but you're not supposed to think that. Don't think, don't question, don't analyze. Just believe in human-caused global warming. Submit to a global environmental authority. Pay your carbon taxes and don't ask questions. Now, as you heard on the news break, the Food and Drug Administration has granted approval to a genetically altered salmon for sale to you, the American people, which will be sold to you without a label identifying that it is genetically modified. The problem is, this salmon has been around for a long time waiting for approval, and it has been studied. And the reason it grows bigger under the genetic modification is its biochemistry is producing far more fat to bulk it up and less protein. And there's another study that we found over in OpposingViews.com. This modified salmon is actually less nutritious than natural salmon. But it looks bigger, and we can control it because it's a patented animal, and that's why it's going to go to market. We live in a society where, unfortunately, and I've said this before, the desire for money and profit has destroyed what used to be the best aspects of the American character. And I can't think of a better example than this Jared Fogle, who was held up to be an icon and a model for American healthy eating by Subway. And now it's come out that the management, the advertising managers at Subway knew this guy was this way all along. But it didn't matter. He's helping us sell sandwiches. He's helping us make money, and that's all that really matters. Now, he's been sentenced to something like 15 years and 3 months, and yes, he deserves it. You don't do this to little kids. Now, I'm not a prude. I'm an adult. I like looking at pictures of naked women. My wife doesn't mind because she understands it's kind of like National Geographic. I'm looking at pictures of beautiful exotic locations I'm never, ever going to get to visit. The way she looks at the Jewelry Channel. But I draw the line at little, tiny kids. I draw the line at little, tiny kids. And especially this question, underage prostitutes, who turned them into being underage prostitutes? Well, of course, I remember when the economy crashed in 2008, we had U.S. government officials telling girls, get into the sex trade. You can make good money there. What does that say about the American national character? We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Last segment of our program today on this Thursday. This transgender nonsense has really reached absurd proportions. We have physically male boys demanding to be allowed to shower and use the girls' locker room as their right because they identify with being a woman. It's absurd. It really has reached a point of absurdity. Now it's turned deadly. Apparently, there was, and I use the term loosely here, a woman named Vicki Thompson. That's what she called himself, herself. Born a male, had not had gender reassignment surgery, was still physically a male. Got into legal trouble, demanded to be sent to a female prison because it identified with being a woman. The judge said that's nonsense. We're not going to put a biologically functional male in a female prison population. And this person had told her friends that if she was sent to a male prison, that she would commit suicide. And it has now been found dead in her cell, his cell. This seems to be more of this plan to get us all so confused about who we are that we can't function anymore as a social group. I'm not sure what I am anymore. I'm not sure where I came from. We have all these people running around saying, well, you may have been born a boy, but you could be a girl inside. No, actually, I'm a lesbian trapped in a man's body. Let's just get that out of the way for right now. It really is absurd. And this idea that, oh, I identify with being a girl. I identify. It's a fantasy. It's an absolute fantasy. It's like all these white people who were like pretending to be black and running the NAACP. Let's get back to the real world. People come in different colors. They come in different genders. Instead of boy, girl, man, woman on the restroom doors, let's have penis and vagina. And I know I'm going to get letters about that one. You are what you are. That your hereditary makeup creates in you. Only the liberals still clinging to the fraud of Margaret Mead's coming of age in Samoa think that they can re-engineer your personality to suit some arbitrary definition of what's ideal. Anyway. Now, apparently, U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter is out there declaring that the Russian campaign in Syria is doomed to fail. Well, don't tell ISIS that. They're busy running for the borders. What an absolute nonsensical thing for Carter to say. Russia has accomplished more in Syria against ISIS in a month than the U.S. did in an entire year. And Carter's out there, well, they're doomed to fail. They should just pack up and go home and let us take care of things. Not going to happen. Anyway, a lot of people are taking Hillary Clinton to task over her demand that comedians stop making fun of her. Reminding us all that Hillary Clinton, like so many other statists in our government, and for that matter Israel's government, do not believe in the First Amendment right to freedom of speech. And remember when Tipper Gore was going on about music lyrics back in the 1990s? Hillary Clinton supported her. Oh, yes, there are things that we can't have there. Then they got on the high horse about shirtless kids in advertisements in the 1990s. Then they got on the game Grand Theft Auto, San Andreas. They're always out there willing to say, well, we need an exception to the First Amendment. The First Amendment can't be absolute. You have a right to freedom of speech only when we say it's okay. No, you don't. Freedom of speech is like virginity. You either are or you aren't. If you're only allowed to talk about things with the government's permission, you do not have freedom of speech, you have permitted speech. And we're seeing this concerted attack on our most fundamental right as American citizens. Not just Hillary and her comedians, but all across college campuses that are trying to ban criticism of Israel. We have some of these Black Lives Matter activists, these leftists out there saying the First Amendment on college campuses ought to be banned because it creates a hostile environment. Because when I come out with my absolute complete lunacy and somebody says, you're being a nut, my feelings are hurt. I'm feeling oppressed. I'm feeling hostility. You're in college. You're supposed to be an adult, not a 5-year-old baby with easy-to-wound feelings. If you can't hack a college environment of open debate, what's going to happen when you try and go out in the real world? Try and get a job against competitors in this highly stressed economy. We've reached the stage where we have an entire generation that seems to believe that if they whine enough, they'll get what they want. And we all know who they got that idea from. Now, somebody just posted an article over at WhatReallyHappened.com that is raising a very valid point about the immigration crisis. Rome, as it got on later, chose to let 500,000 barbarians enter into Rome, past the gate, hoping they would be able to use them as soldiers and laborers. Didn't work out. Found itself dealing with revolution inside its own borders, unstable, uncontrollable political and economic coalitions. And it hastened the fall of Rome. And they're doing exactly the same thing here. Everybody is welcoming in the illegal immigrants and the refugees, thinking it's going to be a source of cheap labor. And it won't be. There are no jobs. Or that these people are going to be so grateful to be allowed into the United States of America that they will gladly march down to the recruiting centers and sign on for the wars of conquest back on the homes they just came from. And that, too, is not happening. Now, over in Tennessee, the chair of the GOP caucus is out there saying it's time to activate the National Guard, round up all the Syrian refugees already here, and kick them out. And this is going to put Tennessee in direct conflict with the White House. What is the White House going to do if all these 33 state governors activate their National Guard and say we're going to seal the borders and the points of entry, and anybody who's in here who doesn't have a legal right to be here, we're going to kick them out? What's Obama going to do? Send in the army to invade the U.S. states and start a new civil war? And I'll tell you right now, your rank and file members of the Army, Navy, and Air Force are not going to be very willing to fire on their own countrymen to protect a bunch of people who don't have a legal right to be here. And that, too, will be a crisis. All right, one final comment, and I know I'm going to get a lot of hate email about this. Not too long ago, the estate of Otto Frank, Anne Frank's father, added his name as co-author to the book, The Diary of Anne Frank, which up until now, we have all been told was written by Anne Frank when she was in hiding from the Nazis. We've all been forced to read it in school. We've all been told it's the absolute unvarnished truth. And now we're being told that, as in point of fact, Otto Frank is a co-author. Now, back in 1959, there was actually a lawsuit where Otto Frank was sued by another writer for using his fictional work and representing it as the diary of his daughter, Anne. The court agreed and ordered a $50,000 fine. A later court then reduced the fine, saying that this other writer, Mayor Levin, wouldn't have had the financial success anyway. And they settled out of court for $15,000. So think about all those phony Holocaust Nazi memoirs that have been exposed as fakes. And it may be The Diary of Anne Frank goes on that list. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. We'll be back tomorrow, Friday, with the Lady Claire here on GCN. Until then, have a good evening and aloha, America.